I've been working the night shift at a roadside diner for years, and I've seen just about everything around here. One night, a family that looked like they'd been out sightseeing all day stopped in for dinner. They were in good spirits, chatting about the places they'd visited, and their son, a boy around 7 or 8, was all excited about a toy car he'd just gotten. It was the kind of scene that's pretty ordinary and even comforting. It breaks up the monotony of the night shift. I watched them for a moment, just enjoying the laid-back atmosphere. After they finished their meal and paid the bill, they hung around a bit longer, with the boy playing with his toy car while his parents chatted. At some point, I had to go take out the trash, and as I walked past the parking lot, I saw the boy wandering alone, like he was exploring the area. I thought it was odd, but assumed he was just taking a little stroll while his parents got ready to leave. But then I noticed something that gave me a bad feeling. One of my coworkers, who I'd never seen interact with customers, was approaching the boy and starting to guide him toward the woods behind the diner. That immediately put me on alert. This coworker was a quiet, reserved guy who only spoke when necessary. I never imagined he'd approach a kid like that, especially without the parents nearby. I decided to watch from a distance to see what was going on, but the whole scene felt off. He was leading the boy in silence, expressionless, while the kid seemed a little confused, looking back toward the parking lot as if he wanted to return. They were getting further away from me and closer to the edge of the woods. My mind started racing, considering all the possibilities. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe he was just helping the kid look for something that had fallen nearby. But something wasn't right. The way he kept glancing around, almost like he was making sure no one was watching, sent chills down my spine. Without making a sound, I took out my phone and began walking in their direction, keeping a safe distance. When I got close enough, I sent a quick message to the shift manager, telling him to call the police and report that a child was being led into the woods by an employee. As I kept following them, the silence around us only heightened my anxiety. Each step made me more tense, but I knew I had to stay cautious so he wouldn't notice me. After a few minutes, I heard police sirens in the distance, and a wave of relief washed over me, but I didn't stop. I kept following them to make sure the boy stayed safe until the police arrived. My coworker seemed to hear the sirens and stopped, looking around as if he was trying to figure out what was happening. At that moment, he let go of the boy, who immediately started crying and tried to slip away toward the denser trees. Thankfully, the police arrived quickly and intercepted him before he could get very far. The boy's parents were already outside the diner, panicked, trying to understand what was going on. Watching the scene shook me. I never would have thought that someone I'd worked with through so many nights could do something like that. After the police took my coworker away, I was still in shock. I stood there, watching as the officers talked to the parents and tried to comfort the boy. They thanked me for acting quickly and having the presence of mind to alert the authorities, but I couldn't feel any relief. The idea that I'd been working alongside someone with such dark intentions was something I couldn't process. In the days that followed, the scene continued to haunt me. Every detail, from the way he glanced around to the moment he let go of the boy when he heard the sirens, kept replaying in my mind. I started questioning everything, from my ability to read people to the safety of the place I work. The night shift was never the same for me after that. To this day, I don't know what motivated my coworker to do what he did, and I may never find out. This experience made me realize that, even in the most routine settings, danger can be much closer than we think. After a long day of work, I was driving late at night and decided to stop at a small family-run inn. It was one of those old, simple places, but it seemed cozy. On my way to the room, I ran into 2 cleaning staff members who greeted me with an unusual amount of friendliness. They seemed more interested than usual in knowing where I was coming from and how long I'd be staying. I thought it was strange, but I was so tired that all I wanted was to lay down and get some rest. I checked in quickly and went straight to the room, just wanting a good night's sleep. But the next morning, I started to notice that something was off. When I woke up, I realized that some of my belongings weren't exactly where I'd left them. My charger was unplugged, some clothes looked like they'd been rummaged through, and most disturbingly, my toothbrush was wet, as if someone had used it. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to convince myself I might be overreacting. After all, I was tired and could have just been imagining things. While packing my things, I overheard a whisper coming from the hallway. By accident, I ended up catching part of a conversation between the same cleaning staff who'd greeted me the night before. They were talking in low voices, but one phrase caught my attention. "We need to prepare the next guest." That made me uneasy, and a feeling of distrust started to creep in. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was probably just work talk, but the way they spoke, almost conspiratorial, left me on edge. I spent the whole day feeling uncomfortable. That night, I returned to my room, but I couldn't relax. Every sound in the hallway seemed louder, and the idea that someone might have gone through my things kept me on high alert. It was past midnight when I heard the sound of a key trying to turn in my door. I froze in bed, unsure of what to do. The handle turned slightly, set in the quiet room, filled with the sound of metal scraping. Panic took over, and that's when I realized I needed to get out of there as fast as I could. As silently as possible, I gathered my things quickly, avoiding any noise that might draw attention. The sounds at the door continued, interrupted by brief silences, as if whoever was outside was trying to be discreet. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I glanced at the window and saw it was low enough to climb out without much noise, since the room was on the ground floor. I seized the chance and carefully slid out, clutching my belongings. Once I was outside, I sprinted toward my car, not looking back. The inn looked even more ominous in the dim night light, and the feeling that something was terribly wrong only grew stronger. I got into my car, started it up, and sped off as fast as I could. Even after a few miles, the panic lingered, and my mind kept replaying that unsettling phrase about preparing the next guest. From that night on, I promised myself never to stop at places that felt suspicious. To this day, I still wonder what could have happened if I'd stayed longer at that inn. My partner and I were on a road trip through rural Montana, and exhausted, we decided to stop at a cheap motel for the night. The place was basic with a bit of a gloomy vibe, but we were too tired to look for another option. As we got the key at the front desk, the manager gave us an odd warning. "Don't mess with the heater grate. It's sensitive." I thought it was a strange thing to say, but didn't think much of it. We dropped our stuff in the room, just wanting to get some rest before hitting the road again the next day. Not long after we lay down, we started hearing sounds coming from the direction of the heater. They were faint noises, like a soft tapping or whisper, something we couldn't quite make out. At first, I thought it was just the heater making typical noises, but as time passed, the sounds became more distinct. We started to pick up on small knocks, and at times, it even seemed like there were muffled words mixed in with the sounds. My partner made a joke to lighten the mood, but it was clear he was just as uneasy about it as I was. As the hours went by, the noise only grew louder, making it harder to ignore. The tapping became more frequent, and the whispers seemed to turn into muffled voices, like someone was on the other side, trying to communicate. We were getting increasingly suspicious, and the thought that there might be something, or someone, behind that grate left us feeling very unsettled. By this point, any hope of getting sleep was gone, and we started feeling like maybe we should check it out. With a mix of fear and curiosity, we decided to take a look. We carefully removed the heater grate, and we immediately noticed there was a strange opening inside. In it, we found a small compartment, hidden and completely out of place for a regular motel. But what really gave us chills were the personal items we found inside. Watches, bracelets, old photos, and even a few hygiene items. It was as if someone had collected mementos from other guests, stashing them away there. We stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The thought that someone might have been spying on guests and keeping these objects as souvenirs filled us with an indescribable sense of dread. Each item in that compartment made the air around us feel heavier. I picked up one of the old photos, and seeing the face of a stranger staring back at me sent a chill down my spine, causing me to drop the photo. At that moment, we looked at each other and knew we weren't staying the night. We packed up as quickly as we could, leaving the room a bit of a mess and not daring to look back. Every shadow seemed suspicious as we left, and the feeling of being watched followed us all the way to the car. We sped out of there with our hearts racing, and it wasn't until we'd driven several miles that we felt like we could finally breathe. But even on the road, the feeling that someone was watching us didn't completely fade away. From that night on, any cheap motel has felt different to us, always carrying the possibility of hiding disturbing secrets.